Sure, take your time. Hi, everybody. My name is, in Swiss German it's pronounced Stephan, but Stephen, yeah, don't worry, Stephen is fine. So hello, everybody, again to my talk about macOS forensics. A couple of people approached me and said, hey, it's super interesting, macOS, because I don't have a clue about Mac forensics. We will come to that. So first, couple of words about me. Besides being a team lead and incident responder, I love forensics. I love being a blue teamer, so blue team for the win. Besides being an incident responder, I'm also ambassador for Switzerland. So if you haven't done it, please visit our beautiful country. And you also can pitch up your tents in the mountain. Why this hour might be well spent? Because I had a discussion with my team colleague, so Oscar is a good team colleague of mine, he's working in my team, and we had a discussion, so he approached me and said, hey, I have an idea for a talk, I want to talk about macOS forensics, and then I said, hey, you know what, I already have booked 2 talks or 2 presentations at 2 different conferences speaking about macOS forensics, because in my opinion, so that started last year, my interest picking up in new techniques and new forensic stuff from macOS, and I said to him, nobody literally had an idea what they are doing because it's still considered niche macOS forensics. I had a talk in a break with an EDR, with an employee from an EDR company, and he said the telemetry from macOS devices is going up and up. And that's clearly also a trend I see when I'm monitoring Twitter and all the social media channels that macOS is trending. I, as an incident responder, I'm using Mac. A lot of C-level management is using Macs. So even you, as red teamer or threat actors, might find a juicy target just poning a Mac or so. So that's why. There was kind of a myth about Mac OS security because back in the days, a couple of years ago, everybody was saying, I cannot catch malware because I'm using a Mac, so Macs don't catch malware. That's way better to use a Mac instead of Windows because they are more secure. That cannot more far away from the truth because what you're seeing here on the slide, that is Apple invested a lot of money, a lot of research, a lot of time building and hardening the Apple, so the Apple operating system, Mac OS. So what we are seeing here, that it's not as easy as you might think to launch and execute malicious code on a Mac OS device, on an operating system. And still attackers are highly successful in doing so. Why is that? We will see that in a couple of minutes. Here is the history of protections. Yes, please come in, have a seat. Thank you for attending this talk. File quarantine, Xprotect, Gatekeeper, and application authorization requirements are all the building blocks of a successful protection mechanism building up on the macOS forensic system, of the macOS operating system. It's, as I said before, it's not as easy as bypassing all these protections. But yesterday at the speakers dinner, Dominic from NTSec talked about how easy it is for them to phish people or to trick users to activate and run payloads and shellcode and just click on random stuff. Because given all these protection mechanisms in place from the macOS operating system, this one here is the truth. So what we are seeing as incident responder, as forensic analyst, is exactly this one here. Attackers are telling the victims, the users, exactly how they should run the malware. It's just a pop-up and they say, okay, download that file here, drag it in that folder, do some magic tricks, and then go in that subsystem, in that menu, deactivate that feature here, and it will launch. And essentially, that bypass all that techniques here. So even if you are arguing, is it safer than Windows, is it safer than macOS or Linux, it's just different. That one here is the truth. So first thing first, because it's a primer, it's a talk about how do I get started as a macOS forensic analyst, we should think about how to set up our lab, right? Because it wouldn't be wise that I do malware analysis, do forensic analysis on my Mac machine here, which is my day-to-day computer I use for writing reports and giving talks. Turns out it's as easy if you have a macOS device. I just downloaded this macOS virtual appliance image from developerapple.com. The only thing you need is a developer account. You can sign it up for free. It doesn't cost you anything. So download it, and I had my virtual machine up and running in 10 minutes. Next thing is, how do I analyze all these threads, all this bad stuff? Turns out, again, Phil Stoke, one of the big names in that macOS forensic and malware analysts scene, published a blog post 6 years ago about how to reverse malware on macOS without getting infected, which I think is a funny title. And he wrote back in 6 years ago, he wrote, "The good news is you actually now have all the tools installed that you need to learn macOS malware analysis and reverse engineering. Fast forward 6 years, that holds still true. As you will see in the subsequent slides, we don't need fancy tools, we don't need fancy and costly software and other like public software from vendors. We could or we can analyze malware pretty good and to a really deep extent with public available tools like strings, like NM, like otool, like file with Xother. So keep that in mind, you don't need a lot to get started in that field here. One last thing, I do not share my host machine with my virtual machine. In some blogs, you can read, create a shared folder between your operating system and your virtual machine. I personally prefer to use file transfer websites to upload the malware from my machine to that file transfer website and then download it from my virtual machine down to, from the temp files or from a shared website to my virtual machine where I actually do the malware analysis. So in this scenario, I can be sure that my virtual machine is really separated from my operating system. And I do not, I forget to close the sharing mechanism and then probably I infect myself. Speaking about infection vectors, how do attackers infect users? How do attackers really get to the meat, to the core, to the computers? Turns out, again, it's pretty simple. It's not as sophisticated as you might think. Gone are the days of browser exploitation, 0 days, crazy 0 clicks, exploit chains. Attackers nowadays, 25, what they are doing, they just buy Google advertisements. What you are seeing here is attackers just bought Google keywords. So I, as just a user, regular user, I want to download some software. I go to Google, I enter, what was it here? Arc browser, just some different browser than Chrome. The first hit I see, the paid hit in Google is malicious. When you click on that link, you will download malware. Is that easy to spot for a regular user, for my mother? Probably not. And that's why it's so successful. Next thing, fake applications, super, super trendy. This is not the Slack you are looking for. Again, the domain is slackforbusiness.net. Yeah, okay, who knows? Would you recognize that when you are doing IT security for a company and you have to protect your whole network? How or which employee would spot that this one is fake? Probably 1%, probably 2%, I don't know. Next thing, malvertising, of course. They just advertise on Twitter, hey, here is a crazy, super cheap software, you can download it for free. No, of course, it's malicious. So you see, attackers, they don't have trick users to download something because users, they still are easy to trick into download something. No 0 clicks, no browser exploit chains, just simple social engineering techniques. Maybe if you want to if we are talking about key takeaways of this talk, this slide here, yes, please do pictures. I can provide you with the slides afterwards if you approach me. We are differentiate 2 different classes of packages or files in macOS forensics, macOS incident response. One of them is non-binary malware about scripts, about application office documents. We will come to that in a moment. The other one is binary malware. So binaries like exe files and DLLs in Windows, they're just called otherwise here in macOS. But that we will look at these two strains in the following slides. We're starting about distribution packages. So distribution packages here on the upper left-hand corner, you see the first one, DMG and PKJ. That's the topic for the next couple of slides. So just given that you browse to a malicious website or you want to download Slack like we saw before, Slack for business.net, when you press on the download button, you get, or maybe you get down the file as a DMG file. DMG file is a package file. It's called Apple Disk Images, and it's super, super common in the macOS ecosystem. It consists like, you can say it's kind of a package, kind of a zip file containing all the resources from that application. However, this is a tricky part here when you're doing or when you're using like a proxy software or just doing static analysis. DMG packages, they don't have a magic header. Maybe you know when you're doing a file on an exe, you see PE file with the MZ and so on. Here, the file is just stated as setlib. And when you do a hex dump of that file, you don't see a magic header. So this might be tricky when you do static analysis or just, like I said before, when you're searching the network stream or proxy logs for DMG files. However, it's not as complicated as it might look. You still can mount that file. As I said before, DMG files are just kind of a package. We can mount these packages on our macOS analysis system. What you're seeing here, I'm using the command HDI util to mount it, and now suddenly I get a new drive. So this one is that Apple AFS volumes installed Parallels desktop. Inside that new volume, so I mounted that DMG file on my system, I got a new volume, I entered that volume, and inside that volume, I see all the packages contained in that DMG file. Why is that interesting? Because I, as incident responder, my sole job is to determine, is it malicious? How malicious is it? C2 channels, IP address, indicator of compromise. How can I search the network for more such malicious samples like this one? And I see I have different files I can check for maliciousness. Is it executable? Does it contain IP address and so on, as we will see later on. So we talked about applications. In Mac application bundles, there's a couple of things that are required. So we see that here. So first of all, there must be an plist, an info plist inside those bundles. And two folders. One is macOS folder, the other one is resources folders. The info plist can contain useful information about application capabilities. And let me introduce you to a new word. It's called plists. Plists are super, super essential. This might be the second keyword of the talk here. If you want to have another key takeaway to take home or take a picture, this one is here, plists. You see a lot of them. Plists are kind of like the registry equivalent to Windows, because inside the plists we see, or we could spot persistence mechanisms, what the malware tries to do, maybe also running different scripts and so on. So this is super essential. Packages, I saw that tweet here and I had to laugh because it's so true. In Windows, we see all the crazy evasion techniques everybody is doing, like the EDR vendors. They're doing call stack spoofing, shellcode in-memory loading, reflective loading and stuff. And this is here, new Trojan malware spreading via pirated software, 2 shell scripts in a trench code hiding in a PKG file. So all we have to do is, hey user, download that software, run that package and you get infected. No magic involved, no wizardry, whatever. Because funny thing is, you see a package here, it's called Guardians Installer, it's malicious. And with that software here, we can look into these packages. So we differentiate between DMG files we have to mount and packages. I can double-click packages. But again, packages also contains different resources, like the DMG files. Packages can contain scripts, can contain resources, can contain additional malicious code. You, as an incident responder, as a forensic analyst, we can extract that information from these packages, and we can really do a deep dive analysis. So I talked about scripts, and we see one here. So maybe you spot it. Runs one install script. Does that look good? Malicious? Maybe. We don't know. But we have the capability. We can extract that script, and we can take a look at it. Which brings us to the next topic, scripts. Bash scripts, Apple scripts, Python scripts. These packages, they have the ability to run pre- and post-processing scripts. When you are installing a package on your macOS device, you might get the real application installed, maybe, but behind the curtain, a malicious script is running. Means maybe dropping malicious payload on disk, maybe contacting a C2 server, but you will not see it if you don't do the analysis. And this, I think this is super powerful here, these post-installation scripts. But what that script here is doing is really just dump, creating a folder, dropping something in that folder. But if you don't have an EDR installed on a Mac OS or just like a sensor, you will not see it, and your device gets infected. Moonlog Lab talk a lot about Mac OS malware. What we are seeing here is that adversaries and attackers can also use Python code because Mac OS, back in the days, Mac OS was built from a Linux derivative, and still you can use a shell, you can still use Python built in Mac OS. So it's just easy as delivering Python code to a user, and the Python code will run with a Python interpreter. Python code is mostly undetected, like we see here, virus total, 0 hits. But still we could use it because Python code is most of the time, it's in plain text and it's readable code, as we will see later on. One of the more interesting stuff when it's come to macOS forensic is Apple script. What we are seeing here is that Apple have a built-in programming language called Apple script. Apple script can be used by attackers to run additional code on your machine, but also one of the neatest feature, I think, coming or speaking for the red team guys here in the room is that I can present a screenshot or a message box to the user stating, please enter your password, I have to install the software. And the user, when they run your package, when they run the DMG file of the application, they just see the pop-up. They just see, oh, that installation script, that not Slack application, which I want to install, need my password. Hey, here's my password. And suddenly, the attackers have root access, have higher privileges on your machine. It's really as dumb and easy as just popping a dialog box to the user. There is, again, no magic involved here. But most of the malware last year and this year are using this technique. It's super, super efficient, but still users are falling for it. After attacker pawned the box or they were able to land a shell on a system, sometimes they want to persist. So persistency means I get an access to that machine, even if the machine gets rebooted, even if the user logs in. As soon as the machine logs in, or as soon as the machine reboots up, I get another shell back. When talking about persistence mechanism, they are all over the place in Windows. Most of the ransomware gangs are using persistence mechanism. Most of the APTs are using persistence mechanism. Turns out when you are dealing with macOS forensic stuff, the reality check here is that there are like, I don't know, 30, 40 persistence mechanism you could use as an attacker to set up persistence mechanism, but the truth is, most of the time, it's just as easy as 0 persistence. The macOS malware landscape is riddled and is filled with stealers. Stealers, as the name implies, they steal your data. They don't want to persist on your box. So a user installs something, the user steals your password, the stealer steals your password, and then just deletes themselves. So this one here is from a threat report from Palo Alto. Stealers on the rise, a closer look at growing macOS threat. Most of the time, they do not persist. We differentiate 2 persistence mechanisms which could be used and are used in the wild. One of them is login items. Login items is not as popular because users see it in the GUI. What attackers are using are launch agent and daemons, meaning given the user the password to the attacker, it will be installed as launch daemon with higher privileges. And if the attacker doesn't have the user's password for installing it with higher privilege, it will launch as launch agent. Which brings us back to the forensic perspective. We, as defenders and incident responder, we only have to check for launch agents and launch daemons, which reduces the checks we have to do to really make, to some extent, a deep or a statement about is the system clean or is the system not clean. We do not have to check every persistence mechanism. In 95% of the cases, this will be enough. Again, coming back to the Linux history from macOS, we could persist as a cron tab. Like I said here, only one malware last year used that persistence technique. Again, it's super easy to spot. If you have done ever Linux forensics, you are familiar with cron jobs, and I'm sure you will check that on your macOS forensic analysis. There are blog posts about a ton of different persistence mechanisms. I probably would not care that much about them. 95% of the time it's launch agent and launch daemons, so read about these techniques and you will be fine in your analysis. Again, also Objective by the Sea from Patrick Wartel, one of the big names in macOS forensics, created a ton of free software. One of them is Knock Knock. If you don't know it and you are using a Mac, I highly recommend to install it because it will warn you when a new software installs a persistence mechanism. Easy to spot, so malware cannot stay hidden on your system. The question of all questions, is it malicious? That's why I get paid. Maybe you also get paid to find that out. Malicious or not malicious, that is the question. Virus total, of course, I'm lazy. First thing I do, I create a hash of the file and I check virus total. So the expectation is, yes, it is malicious, of course. Reality, no, 0 hits. Most of the macOS malware does have 0 hits. Maybe that's just given because macOS threats are not as so Windows have a lot of a bigger market share, and of course EDR vendors and AV vendors are investing way more to write detections and to do analysis. But given again here, it's 0 hits. So be careful when looking up stuff on virus total. When you see 0 hits on virus total, that doesn't mean automatically it's safe. That might be a rookie mistake. However, I think and I love virus total because it gives you instantly information which you can use in your subsequent analysis. What we are seeing here, before even touching the file, just creating a hash sum, looking up on virus total, I get different information back. One of the things here is what we see before, that OSA script, that Apple script, which tries to also trick the user in it. I don't have to do the analysis. Maybe VirusTotal have done or parts of the analysis for myself. So this one could be really a time saver. Speaking about maliciousness, maybe you recall the first few slides where I talked about the protection mechanisms. Apple have a thing called notarization, which means that every application you want to run on Mac must have a digital signature, a valid digital signature. If the signature is not valid, macOS will prompt you and say, hey, this file here is potentially malicious and I will not run it. That's why the attacker have to trick the users with these social engineering tricks to go to the menu here, enable it, blah, 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 blah. So just to really make sure the user runs a malicious application. If you are analyzing a malicious or potentially malicious application and the signature is not valid, that could means, yes, potentially the file is not or is malicious. If it's malicious, you could also search for all this information here because signatures, they have a name, they have an ID, and you could potentially also do threat hunting. So that's also a gold mine for threat hunting in your network. Like we see here, I talk about this bundle identifier and team identifier, aka the developer sign-in certificate, can be used in detection engineering. If you have the telemetry, of course, like an EDR sensor or whatever you are using. Strings, otool, NM. Short recap here, I will skip that one. Again, I'm more than happy to provide the slides to you if you approach me. It's just GMG, PHP app, macOS binaries, and scripts. Initially, when we talked about the virtual analysis machine you want to build up as a forensic analyst, the screenshot stated, now you have all the tools you will ever use built in. And that's kind of true, because what we are seeing here is that built-in tool called Strings. Strings is super, super powerful. One of the first thing I do, I'm not powering up IDA, Hopper, or just an IDE or a debugger because I'm lazy and I want to save time. The first thing I do with a malicious sample is, beside creating a hash and looking up on VirusTotal, is just looking up strings. What strings is doing? Just looking for strings in a binary. And then, oh wonder, what we're seeing here, we see cookie, password, wallet, Telegram, really a tail sign of this could be malicious, this could be a stealer. How much time do I invest here? 1 minute? And I can, to 90% probability, I can say this one here is malicious, and this is not a legitimate application. Strings on steroid, maybe you heard of that tool here from Mandiant. It's called Flare Obfuscated String Solver, short FLOSS. It's super, super awesome. It's strings on steroid because maybe you know, maybe you don't know, because characters can be represented differently with UTF-8, UTF-16, or whatever. This one here solves most of the problems you will ever encounter when doing strings analysis. Don't use strings, use FLOSS, save your day. Moving on, one of the built-in tools from macOS Forensics, or which I use daily, is otool. What otool does is it shows me the dynamic libraries used by the tool. Why is that important? We will see that in a moment. The screenshot here is, keep in mind, we have 2 or 3 red rectangles, and now here in yellow, who paid enough attention and saw 2 versions of the binary. Because this is interesting, and this is a difference when coming from a Windows reversing and Windows incident response background, because in macOS, there's a thing called fat binaries. And within the same binary, within the same package, I can have 2 different architectures, 2 different files. So keep in mind, when you're doing analysis on one file, that might be tampered your analysis, because effectively you might not doing the analysis on one binary, but instead of two binaries. So keep in mind that you might want to extract the binary for your architecture first. So in that case here, I can use lipo to extract the binary I want. Shared binaries, coming back to that one here. Why is that important, that otool here? Attackers can download a legitimate binary and enrich it with a malicious dynamic library. This will break the digital signature, but otherwise it will load your malicious shared library in memory space when the application runs. Again, who will care? The user will check, okay, this is the Slack application I want. Slack is running, fine, everything fine, but in the background, the malicious library is also running on your system. Strings, again, when we are taking that malicious library here and just running strings against it, what we are seeing here, again, it's such a time saver. I don't need a debugger. I don't need crazy reverse engineering skills. All I'm doing is just looking at the plain files. I see a lot of output, and instantly I can say, this one here is malicious. And again, coming from an incident response background, most of the time, speed and time is just precious and crucial. We don't have time to reverse engineer 3 days a sample. We need information right now. We need information in the next hour. So these techniques here might also save your day. Also, this technique here, it's called NM. NM is listing the function names within a macOS binary. Instantly, we could see malicious things in it. For example, here, what we are seeing, get cookies. Get cookies DB pass. Get extensions wallet. Get login keychain. Malicious? Probably. Yes, definitely. Which legitimate? Let's say again the example from Slack. Will Slack using your keychain, your wallet, your passwords? Probably not. Just looking at the function names from an application, I can tell with 95% probability, is it malicious, is it not malicious? Another DMG example, this one here leading to Python code. We do file. This time we have the magic header. It's telling us, okay, this is one a MacOS executable, and we are running strings again. So we are repeating here in our analysis process. Strings tell us, okay, loading Python, interesting, which means I can extract the Python code from that malicious application. This one here is Python compiled Python code, but with the help of public available online resources, I get public or I get readable text back. So you see, even if you are faced with a Python application, a Python file for Mac OS, it's really easy to get something back you can work with. This one here, that malicious application here, is in fact, again, a cookie stealer, and you see plain text files, which really hints that something is malicious here. Again, no magic, no tricks, no debugger involved. This one here is a bit tricky, and be careful about that. When doing strings analysis, you might find something which looks like base 64 decoding. When you go to CipherChef or another platform and just paste it in, say, hey, this one is base 64, no results, no readable strings. Turns out it's base 32. So without just mangling a bit with the inputs, the parameters or so, I get readable strings back. And instantly I have more information I can work with. Again, this does not involve reverse engineering. This does not involve crazy techniques. Dynamic analysis, 11 minutes left. I'm good on time. What I'm doing, besides the static analysis, besides strings and whatnot, is looking or running the malicious application on my file system. One of the built-in tools on macOS is FS usage. You see on the the upper part, no, on the lower part of the screen, you see what I'm doing. So I created a new text file, and I wrote to that text file. That output here is not super comfortable to read. Again, Patrick Wardle from Objective-by-the-Sea created a tool called File Monitor. You can download it, and the output from File Monitor is super readable. Again, we see all the necessary information. Without touching or running the binary in a debugger, we see exactly which files were opened by our malicious sample, which files were written by our malicious sample, which again we can use to thread out in our network or just doing another stuff with it. Exactly here, so that file monitor gives us a plist, a persistence mechanism, instantly without doing reverse engineering. The funny thing is here, also from Patrick Wardle, is dynamic binary analysis using a debugger. He says, yeah, gain full understanding of the analysis code. The challenges are, it's rather complex. As you might have tell after this talk here, I personally strive to go for the long-hanging fruits, meaning I use strings a lot, meaning I'm doing a lot of dynamic analysis, meaning I'm just looking how much information I can squeeze out of a malicious sample or probably malicious sample without going in a debugger. Because whoever, maybe there are some skilled debuggers, a reverse engineer here, I would not say I'm that skilled. So with these techniques here I presented in the last few slides, you will be able, and I'm sure you will be able to tell to 80 to 90% probability if a sample is malicious or not. Again, stating or coming from an incident response background, this is most of the time enough. Maybe a little disclaimer here, if you have something suspected, APT, nation state, North Koreans, and so on, yes, maybe then you should invest some more time, but these are the rare cases. Some more, we talked about EDRs before. This is not a pitch here. I think that's pretty cool. Aftermath, it can be used like an analysis machine. You can install Aftermath, you can download it from GitHub, and it will monitor, like Sysmon for Windows, all the processes, all the network connections. This might be a good addition to your virtual machine analysis environment, so that you can really see and pinpoint what a malicious sample is doing. I personally, I'm a super huge fan of Elastic. I don't work for Elastic, I don't have stocks from Elastic, but Elastic, they open sourced a lot of their detection logic. So Elastic, the company also have an EDR, and they open sourced a lot of their detection logic. Have a look. Even if you are doing incident response or threat detection or detection logic and so on, it's super useful to learn new stuff. And when you are working on an internal security team, you might find blind spots you are not covering in your CM or in your EDR. This one here is from my blog, because my time is running out and we have some minutes later on for questions. Keep in mind, because this one was really a short primer about macOS forensics, there is a lot more to tell. So if you are really interested in that topic, you find more information here. 6 minutes, and then we have some questions left. I mentioned that name a couple of times before, Patrick Wardle. He's really one of the big names in that macOS forensics scenes. Recently, he published volume 2 of his book, The Art of Mac Malware. Both books are free to download on his website, so you don't have to buy it. I personally recommend buy it, because to support Patrick and also to give something back to him. Like I said before, I used a lot of open source tools and information. If somebody wants to approach me, I'm more than happy to share my slides, and then you see all the questions and not the questions, all the references I used. There are too much to really show here, but you will see which information I use for this talk. I'm standing on the shoulders of giant here. This one was not my research, so I'm giving I'm giving back my thanks to the community. You are awesome. And now we have questions. 5 minutes. Thank you.